There is one place in our world that looks like a void on the map. It is a huge white continent covered in eternal cold, which formally belongs to everyone, but in fact belongs to no one. Since childhood, we have been told that Antarctica is a nature reserve where scientific research is conducted and penguins live, a realm of untouched nature. However, if there is really only snow and ice there, why is this piece of land guarded as strictly as the borders of nuclear powers? What is the reason that the Antarctic Treaty, signed in the middle of the last century, effectively prohibits any country from approaching certain coordinates, threatening sanctions comparable to a military tribunal? For decades, Secret Service archives around the world have stored files marked Top Secret that link this continent to the darkest and most mysterious episodes in human history. Our search takes us back to the middle of the last century, when an entire fleet of German submarines disappeared without a trace there. A few years later, a powerful American military group that arrived there with the intention of starting a war retreated in panic, losing its advanced fighter jets in a clash with what they described as air. We are accustomed to thinking of ourselves as the masters of this planet. However, in reality, we live on the roof of a giant bunker, and those who dwell below may soon make their presence known. Today, we will break the silence, open the folder Secret Base 211, and learn that entering this icy world could pose a threat to all of humanity. To discover the truth about what lies beneath the ice, we need to put aside our school history textbooks and immerse ourselves in the madness of the 1930s. At a time when Europe was preparing to redraw its borders, the Nazi regime's leadership was waging its own secret war. Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, Reichsfuhrer SS, were obsessed with an idea that would seem fantastical to the average person. They weren't just looking for new territories, they were looking for the gate. The ideology of the SS was based not on politics, but on the occult. The black magic that permeated its essence found expression in the activities of the occult societies Thule and Vril, which effectively controlled the decisions of the Reich. Their mediums, falling into a trance during long sessions, created strange maps of the starry sky and repeated one thing: the masters are waiting. They were convinced that beneath the polar ice lay an ancient race possessing the power of Vril, an energy capable of both creation and destruction. For the Nazis, Antarctica was not an ordinary continent. It was a huge temple that served as an altar where they planned to make a sacrifice to absolute power. In 1938, Germany sent the ship Schwabenland to the South Pole. The official purpose of the expedition was to harvest whale blubber. However, the composition of the crew puzzled the intelligence services of other countries. On board were not only biologists and geographers, but also specialists in ritual archaeology, astrologers, and SS officers with extended powers. In search of more than just land, when Luftwaffe planes began to survey the icy desert, dropping pennants with swastikas, they were looking for specific points of power marked on ancient Tibetan maps. And they managed to find them. Pilots who penetrated deep into the continent reported incredible things. Instruments operating in permafrost conditions recorded thermal anomalies. They discovered oases, lakes that did not freeze even in these harsh conditions, surrounded by bare rocks. However, the most frightening discovery was made when the first landing parties entered the caves of these oases. Subsequent reports stated that the walls of these caves were not of natural origin. They were perfectly smooth, as if processed by a laser, and covered with symbols that caused nosebleeds in unprepared soldiers. These were not ordinary patterns, but invocation diagrams. It became clear to the Nazis that they had discovered more than just a hideout. They had found the Temple of the Black Sun. After listening to the report, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz uttered a phrase that sounded like a hymn to victory and evil. "My submariners have discovered a true earthly paradise, an impregnable fortress." From that moment on, Project 211 was born. But this was no ordinary military base. It was a monstrous amalgamation of a laboratory, in a place that could be called a satanic temple. The workers who labored there carved out halls in the glaciers for rituals. Evidence found after the war indicates that the Nazis sought not only to establish contact with the underground race, but also to perform the uncorking ritual. Strange altars carved from black stone were discovered in the ice caves, bearing symbols frighteningly reminiscent of the sigils used to summon demons in medieval magic books, but more complex and geometrically precise. They were convinced that if enough blood was spilled in the right place, the ice wall would collapse and the gods would appear to the world. In 1945, during the fire in Berlin, the Führer's convoy, more than 100 of the most modern submarines, disappeared without a trace from the port of Kiel. Their destination was Antarctica. But what were they carrying? Years later, the captains who were questioned recalled their cargo with alarm. It was not just gold bars. The lead boxes, from which a dull rumbling could be heard, contained the priests of the Order of the Black Stone, people who never appeared in public and hid their faces behind masks. It is whispered that the U-977 submarine secretly carried the most dangerous artifact of the Third Reich, the so-called Stone of Ishtar, an object rumored to be capable of concentrating psychic energy for mass sacrifices. New Swabia disappeared silently. The Nazis went under the ice not only to survive, they left to complete a ritual that they had failed to finish in Europe. And when polar darkness covered Antarctica, lights unrelated to electricity lit up in its heart. The superpowers celebrating victory had no idea that the real war, the war for the very soul of humanity, was just beginning, and that the enemy was now hiding beyond the reach of their bombs. 1947. The world, having just won the war, was basking in triumph. But in Washington, the euphoria gave way to an icy, clinging horror. American intelligence, studying the remains of Nazi archives, discovered something that made their blood run cold. The colossal, top-secret Führer's convoy, more than 100 of the latest submarines, had disappeared without a trace, heading south. They understood. Hitler had not simply disappeared. He had moved the most vulnerable part of his empire to an untouched ice fortress he called New Swabia. In response, America immediately accepted the challenge. Under the guise of a scientific mission codenamed High Jump, a powerful armada, comparable in size to an invasion fleet, headed for the Antarctic coast. This was no ordinary scientific expedition. It was a full-scale war led by a national hero, the famous polar explorer Admiral Richard Byrd. His fleet included 4,500 Marines, the flagship aircraft carrier Philippine Sea, destroyers, and a submarine. There were no biologists looking for penguins among the crew. Only combat vehicles, permeated with fear, remained in the field. The first weeks passed in a suffocating, coffin-like silence. The ships, trapped in ice, fought not against German submarines, but against the very nature of the continent. Reconnaissance pilots, returning to their ships, spoke not of fog, but of glowing dots moving under a layer of ice several kilometers thick. Magnetic compasses lost their orientation, their needles spinning wildly, as if spellbound by an invisible force. The icy coffin watched over its unwanted guests. On February 26, hell began. It did not come from the heavens, but from the waters, from the icy depths where the Nazi submarines had plunged. The sea surface suddenly began to bubble, as if heated by a huge, invisible cauldron. Objects that defied all the laws of earthly physics emerged from the water in complete silence. They were flat, disc-shaped devices emitting an ominous, pulsating, orange-red light. Not only did they fly, but they also hovered in the air, made sudden jerks, accelerated to incredible speeds, and instantly turned at right angles. Maneuvers that seemed like they would destroy any object. What happened next could not be called a battle. It was a cold-blooded, methodical extermination. American Corsair fighters, the pride of aviation, rushed into the attack, but their guns were powerless against the unknown coating of the discs. The discs did not use shells. They emitted rays. Eyewitnesses called them sound cannons or death rays. When the beam hit American planes, the metal was not destroyed. It instantly turned to dust or flared up like gunpowder. The destroyer Murdoch disappeared without a trace, as if it had been burned by a giant blowtorch, completely destroyed and sunk to the bottom. Admiral Byrd, standing on the bridge of his flagship, saw in a matter of moments that his mighty armada was turning into a defenseless toy ship. It became clear to him that they were not fighting the remnants of the Reich, but a force for which the atomic bomb was a mere trifle. The operation, planned to last 8 months, was curtailed in a swift 20 days. The damaged, trembling remnants of the fleet fled, throwing equipment, weapons, and all hope overboard. However, Admiral Byrd's personal nightmare was just beginning. His plane's reconnaissance flight was suddenly interrupted by an interception. The engine stalled, but the plane did not begin to fall. An invisible beam picked it up and carried it deep into the continent, piercing the icy funnel. A voice came over the headphones. "Don't worry, Admiral, we'll land you." He found himself in a completely different world. Under a thick layer of ice, in Agartha itself, which the Nazis had talked so much about, he discovered untouched forests, warm lakes, and a sparkling city built not of ordinary materials, but of something resembling rainbow crystal. He was greeted by tall, radiant beings with faces full of ancient wisdom. They led him to the keeper of the gate, who treated him not with hostile malice, but with condescending pity, as if he were a wild beast that had disturbed the sacred peace. "We have been watching you for a long time," a voice that needed no words sounded in the Admiral's head. "The Nazis sought to break the seal to open the gate, but you humans surpassed them. You have mastered the atom. You destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You dared to touch a power capable of destroying not only your world, but ours as well. We will not allow this." Byrd was given an ultimatum. The stern warning read by the ruler of the underworld stated, "Tell your rulers, this world is not yours. And if you try to use atomic weapons again, we will force you back to the Stone Age." The Admiral was released, but made a prophet, doomed to eternal secrecy. Returning to Washington, he tried to convey the truth, but his words were met with an ominous silence. Men in strict suits told him to forget everything. The report on flying saucers and gatekeepers was immediately classified and marked top secret. Before finally disappearing from public view, Byrd issued a prophetic warning to the media. The harsh reality is that the continent of the United States may be attacked by flying objects capable of traveling from pole to pole with incredible speed. The world chose to ignore it. The world chose to close that door and pretend it had never been there. Thus was born the great conspiracy of silence, known as the Antarctic Treaty, which, instead of protecting nature, became a prison for secrets and a seal concealing the true enemy of humanity. Admiral Byrd's defeat was not just a military disaster. It was a turning point when two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, once irreconcilable enemies, experienced simultaneous fear for the first time. In the secret shelters of Washington and Moscow lay identical, though independently obtained, reports. A powerful force was at work beneath the South Pole, against which atomic weapons were powerless. This force, this guardian of the gate, guarded something that could not be awakened. The time to act was critical. They could not defeat the enemy, but they could isolate it. In 1959, the world saw the birth of the Antarctic Treaty, perhaps the most massive, airtight lie in human history. It was not a treaty of peace and scientific cooperation. It was an act of surrender, signed under the pressure of fear. All 27 articles of this document were aimed at one single goal: to turn the entire continent into an impenetrable prison for secrecy. A ban on military action? That's just a cover. A ban on nuclear testing? Signs that nuclear power is useless against those who dwell below. Freedom of scientific research? That's just freedom of observation. Take a look at a map of Antarctica. The main research stations, Amundsen Scott, USA, Vostok, Russia, Concordia, France, Italy, are not designed to collect meteorological data. Their locations suggest that they act as guard posts, protecting the perimeter of an invisible but substantial security cap. Their main purpose is acoustic monitoring. For years, the stations have been drilling deep ice wells, but not in search of microorganisms. They are searching for the pulse. For many years, scientists from secret laboratories have been recording inexplicable phenomena. This is not seismic activity in the usual sense. It is a low-frequency, rhythmic hum emanating from beneath the ice, from the area known as New Swabia. This hum does not obey geological laws. It is not a random phenomenon. It resembles a war drum beating in an alarming, frightening rhythm. Studies have shown that the frequency of this hum has no analog on Earth. It is the sound of the call, left behind as a legacy of the Nazis' horrific Project 211. Their rituals, their black stone altars, all of this has left a deep, indelible wound in the very heart of the continent. They imbued themselves with their insane beliefs and charged the entire continent with them. And now that faith is beginning to falter. Every station located at the pole is equipped with ultra-sensitive gravimeters and magnetometers. They record a phenomenon that the world media interprets as the Northern Lights. In reality, it is an energy surge. At certain times, a giant dark magnetic field bursts out from under the ice, coinciding with the dates of occult rituals performed by the Nazis. Experts call it the breath of the abyss. Invisible to the human eye, but detectable by technical instruments. And every year it manifests itself more and more strongly, more and more insistently, as if something enormous is awakening from its icy slumber. In the year 2014, an incident occurred that put an end to the illusion of control. The event was immediately classified under the designation Project Sigil. A team of drillers from different countries working near the Vostok station finally achieved what everyone had anticipated. At a depth of almost 4 kilometers, they broke through the ice cover and penetrated an unknown artifact. They hoped to see an ancient lake. However, instead of water, their drill entered a cavity. Communication was lost. 3 days later, when a rescue team was sent there, they discovered something that should not have been there. Inside the ice grotto were the ruins of Base 211. But these were not ordinary ruins. It was a crypt. The room was surprisingly well preserved, as if time had stopped above it. Inside, lit by emergency lights, was the black stone altar itself, decorated with sigils described in Nazi reports. However, this was not the most frightening discovery. Around the altar on the floor, traces were found. They were not left by humans. Analysis showed that these were the remains of some kind of organic matter, but its structure was so unusual and complex that the instruments could not identify it. And the most frightening thing was that the traces did not lead to the exit, but to the wall, to that very perfectly smooth rock wall that goes deep into the continent. A man lay frozen in the icy grip of the altar. It was not a German soldier, but an American scientist from the first drilling team who had disappeared 3 days ago. His face was contorted into such a wild grimace of horror that the medics could not find the words to describe his condition. But most importantly, death was not caused by the cold. There were no visible injuries on his body. His internal organs had stopped, as if his body had been instantly subjected to an unimaginable leap in time, turning him into a living corpse. On his chest, carved with his bloody fingernails, was a single monstrous image, the sigil of summoning. A Nazi ritual performed decades ago had left an indelible mark. It didn't just leave a mark, it infected the very earth, creating a mental beacon that activates under special circumstances. And now that beacon had been activated. Everything that followed, global warming, melting glaciers, alarming climate reports, became a cover. It's not about greenhouse gases. The reason lies in the fact that the glacier, which for centuries served as the seal, is melting from within. The breath of the abyss, its intensifying energy resonance, creates heat that penetrates the ice and raises the temperature across the entire planet. As the end of the silence approaches, the secret that was supposed to remain hidden in the depths of Antarctica is about to come out. World leaders have less and less time to decide how to return to the bowels of the Earth, what they failed to defeat 70 years ago. And now the main problem is not who is there, but what will happen when the ice cover breaks and it turns its gaze upon us. As Admiral Byrd predicted, history is repeating itself. The war we feared so much did not start with the Russians or the Americans. Its origins lie in the shadow beneath the ice. While the world powers sought to conceal the growing pulse of antiquity, covering it up with panic-stricken statements about climate change, Antarctica itself began to actively and visibly remove the seal. The best evidence of the failure of the 1959 Act of Surrender came in the form of satellite images. For many years, governments, through their controlled agencies, attempted to heavily censor mapping services such as Google Earth, blurring or replacing anomalous formations with white noise. However, with the increase in glacier melt and thanks to data leaks from old NASA radars, this has become impossible. From 2014 to 2016, independent scientists using LIDAR scanning data obtained stunning images taken under glaciers. In the area of the Ellsworth and East Antarctic mountain ranges, under 3 kilometers of ice, structures were discovered that could not have been the result of natural processes. These were colossal pyramids. Their perfect geometry, calculated with mathematical precision, left no room for doubt. These were not natural formations, but giant structures erected by intelligent beings. They were not located randomly, but formed a network with surprising accuracy, which, as calculations showed, covered key points of the continent. The base of each of them was several times larger than the famous Pyramid of Cheops. The most terrifying thing was not their size, but their purpose. They were not tombs. They were relays, or, even more frightening, keys. The study of magnetic fields showed that these structures do not lie passively in the ice. They generate enormous energy. As the ice melts, these pyramids, like giant ancient batteries, begin to activate, creating a communication channel with something hidden beneath them. In the midst of a growing planetary crisis in December 2016, something unthinkable happened. Buzz Aldrin suddenly arrived at the South Pole, bypassing risks and ignoring all protocols. At 86 years old, a veteran of the space race and the second man to walk on the moon, he traveled to the most dangerous place on Earth. He finally reached the location where satellite images had captured the top of an ancient, activated pyramid, now almost free of its icy shell. In a state of shock caused by this visit, Aldrin immediately reached for the phone. In the absolute panic that overwhelmed him, which was beyond any control, he wrote a short, frightening message on Twitter. He attached a photo of the icy, flawless pyramid to it. "We are all in danger. This is evil itself." The tweet lasted only a few minutes before it was deleted, but that was enough. A screenshot instantly spread across the network, becoming informal but irrefutable evidence. What exactly broke through his mental barriers and provoked such sudden, animalistic terror? The answer to this question remained unspoken, frozen in icy silence, and becoming the most frightening secret of this visit. A few hours later, Aldrin was urgently evacuated. The official reason was lung edema due to low pressure and fatigue. However, doctors who had access to his medical records spoke of severe post-traumatic shock and a sudden, inexplicable mental breakdown. The sudden illness of the great astronaut was direct evidence that the seal, which the world powers had been trying to maintain since 1959, had been broken. He became the first public victim of the evil that was penetrating our reality. Now the doors are open. The question is no longer what lies within, but when it will appear. Our story began with breaking the silence. We ended it by confirming that the mystery of Antarctica is not just the past, it is our future, which is only just beginning.